Ma'am, you missed some trash by the briefing room. The voice carried the polite condescension that young soldiers reserved for civilian contractors who worked on their base. Specialist Rodriguez pointed toward a crumpled paper near the door, his tone suggesting he was doing her a favor by noticing. Sarah Phoenix Mitchell didn't look up from her methodical floor cleaning. At 68, her movements appeared careful and deliberate, her weathered hands gripping the mop handle with the steady attention of someone whose arthritis reminded her daily of old injuries. To the soldiers of the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, she was simply Miss Mitchell, the night shift custodian who cleaned their offices and occasionally offered quiet advice that nobody really listened to. But Sarah's eyes were anything but ordinary. As she worked, they cataloged every detail with surgical precision. The way Rodriguez unconsciously adjusted his gear indicating poor equipment fitting. The micro-expressions of stress on Lieutenant Chen's face that suggested mission anxiety. The way Captain Morrison checked his secure phone repeatedly, betraying concern about classified communications. "Mrs. Mitchell, make sure you get the conference room extra clean tonight," called out Staff Sergeant Davis, pointing with casual authority. "We've got VIPs coming in the morning for operational briefings." Sarah nodded with practiced subservience, shuffling toward the indicated room with her cleaning cart. But her movements weren't those of a broken-down cleaning lady. They were the economical, energy-conserving motions of someone who had learned to move efficiently in environments where wasted movement could mean death. The base hummed with late-evening activity as another shift prepared for night operation. Sarah worked around them like a piece of furniture, invisible and unremarkable. But when Private Wilson struggled with a jam in his M4 during weapons cleaning, Sarah was there with quiet efficiency. "Bolts sticking because of carbon buildup in the gas tube," Sarah murmured, her voice barely audible above the background noise. "Clean it with CLP, not just wipe it down, and check your firing pin. It's showing wear pattern." Wilson looked surprised that the old cleaning lady knew anything about weapons maintenance, but he followed the advice. His next function check was flawless. Sarah returned to her mopping, but her attention was focused on a hushed conversation taking place near the operations center. Two NCOs were discussing a classified insertion scheduled for the following week. Personnel who would be infiltrating through Delta Corridor. The intelligence was filed away in Sarah's memory alongside hundreds of other seemingly insignificant details that were slowly forming a pattern she hoped she would never need to act upon. Sarah had been conducting the most comprehensive security assessment in Fort Bragg's history for the past 2 years. She just hadn't been authorized to do it. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the administrative building as Sarah worked through her cleaning routine. A ghost moving through spaces where real warriors planned missions that would never officially exist. But Sarah Mitchell was the most real warrior any of them would ever encounter. Colonel Jennifer Hammer Morrison had commanded soldiers in 4 different combat theaters and could read a battlefield like sheet music. What she couldn't understand was why every instinct she had developed over 22 years was screaming warnings about an elderly custodian. Morrison was conducting her weekly security inspection when she noticed Sarah working near the classified materials storage area. There was something about the old woman's movements too controlled, too aware, that triggered recognition patterns Morrison had learned to trust in places where being wrong meant casualties. "Sergeant Davis," Morrison called to her operations NCO. "Tell me about the civilian contract." Davis glanced toward Sarah with mild familiarity. "Mitchell? Been here about 18 months. Does solid work, keeps to herself. Former military, I think. She knows her way around equipment." "Why, ma'am?" Morrison studied Sarah more carefully. The way she positioned herself never blocked her own exit routes. The way her eyes moved, not the wandering gaze of someone lost in routine, but the systematic scanning of someone maintaining situational awareness. "Where did she serve?" Davis consulted his clip. "Personnel file shows Army, but details are classified above my level." Background check came back clean through normal channels. But Morrison was watching Sarah clean an M240 machine gun in the armory, and her breath. The elderly woman's hands moved with impossible precision, field stripping the weapon in under 20 seconds faster than most infantry soldiers could manage it. "Normal channels," Morrison repeated slowly. "Sergeant, when was the last time you saw someone field strip a 240 that fast?" Davis looked over just as Sarah finished reassembling the machine gun. Her movements had been fluid, automatic, the result of muscle memory that went far beyond civilian contractor training. "Ma'am, I've never seen anything like that. Not from someone her age." Morrison felt ice water flow through her veins. She had encountered that level of weapons proficiency exactly once in her career, in classified briefings about units that officially didn't exist. That evening, Morrison placed a secure call to a number buried deep in her contacts list. The voice that answered carried the weight of decades spent in shadows deeper than most people could imagine. "Colonel Morrison, it's been a while. What do you need?" "Sir, I may have a situation. There's a civilian contractor at Fort Bragg who's displaying skills that don't match her background. Weapons handling, situational awareness, movement patterns, everything suggests advanced special operations training." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When the voice returned, it carried new urgency. "Describe her." Morrison provided Sarah's physical description, her work patterns, the impossible weapons proficiency she had witnessed. Another pause, longer this time. "Colonel, what name is she using?" "Sarah Mitchell." The silence that followed lasted nearly 30 seconds. When the voice finally returned, it was stripped of all casual authority and filled with something approaching reverence. "Phoenix 7 is active. Repeat. Phoenix 7 is active on your installation. Do not approach. Do not interfere. Do not acknowledge. We are mobilizing immediate support." Morrison stared at her phone as the line went dead, wondering what kind of legend she had just stumbled across. Tuesday arrived with thick morning fog rolling across Fort Bragg's training areas, reducing visibility to mere yards. Sarah had been monitoring weather patterns for weeks, knowing that certain operations required specific atmospheric conditions for cover. At 0347 hours, she was positioned near the motor pool with her cleaning cart, ostensibly conducting routine maintenance facility cleaning. But her attention was focused entirely on the approaching convoy, 4 black Humvees with government plates, moving with the controlled urgency of a classified transport. The lead vehicle stopped at the security checkpoint, and Sarah watched as the guards conducted their inspection with practiced efficiency. Standard procedure, nothing unusual. But Sarah's trained eye caught the detail that would have escaped normal observation. The third vehicle sat lower on its suspension than military specifications allowed, indicating cargo significantly heavier than standard personnel transport. As the convoy passed through the checkpoint, Sarah caught a glimpse of a figure in the rear window of the third vehicle. Her blood turned to ice. It was Captain Lisa Chen, the intelligence officer who had supposedly died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan 18 months earlier. She was alive, but her eyes carried the hollow look of someone who had been systematically broken and rebuilt according to someone else's specifications. She looked directly at Sarah as the convoy passed, and for a split second her hand moved to the window in a gesture so subtle it would have been invisible to anyone who hadn't taught her the signal themselves. 2 fingers pressed against the glass, held for exactly 3 seconds, then withdrawn. The emergency code they had established when Lisa first joined Phoenix Squadron. Hostile control, maximum threat. Initiate protocol blackout. Sarah's cover identity evaporated like morning mist. Phoenix 7 was active again. She abandoned her cleaning cart and moved with purpose toward the communications building, her elderly shuffle replaced by the efficient stride of someone accustomed to operating under impossible deadlines. The security guard at the building entrance barely looked up as Sarah approached with her maintenance credentials. "Morning, Mrs. Mitchell. Kind of early for routine work, isn't it?" "Emergency call," Sarah replied, her voice still carrying the submissive tone of a civilian contract. "Ventilation system malfunction in the server room. Could damage classified equipment if it's not addressed immediately." The guard waved her through without question. Sarah had spent 18 months establishing her harmless persona, and that investment was now paying dividends. In the server room, Sarah's hands moved with practiced precision across equipment that supposedly required specialized clearance to access. Within minutes, she had bypassed 4 separate security protocols and was deep in the base's classified communication system. The message she transmitted was short, encrypted with protocols that hadn't been used in public channels for over 2 decades. "Phoenix 7 to control. Blackout protocol activated. Asset recovery required. Coordinates followed." She included the convoy's route information, vehicle descriptions, and her assessment of hostile force capabilities. Then she wiped all traces of her access and returned to her cleaning cart as if nothing had happened. The legend of Phoenix 7 was about to become very real for everyone at Fort Bragg. The response came faster than Sarah had expected. At 0715 hours, barely 3.5 hours after her encrypted transmission, the morning quiet at Fort Bragg was shattered by the unmistakable sound of rotors cutting through air. 3 U-60 Blackhawks appeared through the fog like mechanical predators, their approach so low and fast that they seemed to materialize from nowhere. They didn't land at the designated helipad, they touched down directly on the parade field, their rotor wash scattering equipment and sending soldiers scrambling for cover. Out of the lead aircraft stepped a figure who transformed the atmosphere on the base with her mere presence. Brigadier General Maria Valkyrie Santos was a legend in special operations circles, a woman whose career had been spent in places that didn't appear on official maps. She was followed by a team of operators whose equipment and bearings screamed Tier 1 Special Forces, the kind of soldiers most paratroopers only heard about in whispered conversations. Colonel Morrison, who had spent the night pacing her office after making her phone calls, rushed to meet the unexpected arrivals. But General Santos walked past her as if she were part of the landscape, her attention focused entirely on locating one specific individual. "Where is Phoenix 7? Santos demanded of the first senior NCO she encountered. Staff Sergeant Davis, still processing the surreal nature of the situation, pointed toward the administrative building where Sarah was conducting her normal morning routine. "Ma'am, do you mean Mrs. Mitchell? She's cleaning offices in—" "Do not call her that name," Santos interrupted sharply. "That identity is compromised. From this moment forward, this base is operating under emergency protocols." The general strode toward the administrative building with her team following in precise formation. Soldiers throughout the complex stopped their morning activities to stare at the procession, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. Inside the building, Sarah continued her methodical cleaning of office windows, her movements showing no acknowledgement of the commotion outside. But when General Santos appeared in the doorway, Sarah's hands paused for exactly one heartbeat, the same micro-hesitation that had been trained into Phoenix Squadron members for instant recognition. When Sarah resumed her work, her movements had changed. The careful elderly motions were gone, replaced by the fluid efficiency of someone who had spent decades maintaining operational security under combat conditions. "Phoenix 7, General Santos said, her voice carrying the weight of shared history and classified operation. "We received your signal. Status report." Sarah set down her cleaning cloth and turned to face the general. When she spoke, her voice was no longer the submissive whisper of a civilian contractor, but the crisp authority of someone accustomed to briefing the highest levels of command. "Blackout protocol confirmed, General. Primary asset is alive but under hostile control. Secondary assets unknown. Base security is compromised at levels I'm still determining." She gestured toward the window, where soldiers could be seen gathering in confused clusters, trying to understand what was happening to their routine morning. "Ma'am, the situation is worse than my initial assessment indicated. This isn't just an extraction operation, it's the culmination of an infiltration that's been years in the making." General Santos's expression hardened as she processed Sarah's assessment. "Infiltration details. Full briefing." Sarah moved to a tactical map of Fort Bragg mounted on the office wall, her transformation from custodian to operational commander now complete. "Ma'am, I've been conducting surveillance for 18 months under civilian cover. What I initially believed was routine security assessment revealed patterns consistent with long-term hostile intelligence gathering." She pointed to specific locations on the map. "Guard rotation schedules are being monitored and recorded. Communication protocols are being. Training schedules for classified units are being documented and transmitted off-base through compromised personnel." Colonel Morrison, who had finally caught up to the group, stood in the doorway listening with growing horror. "Are you saying we have enemy operatives working at Fort Bragg?" Sarah's pale eyes fixed on Morrison with laser intensity. "Colonel, you have a network operating at Fort Bragg. They've been preparing for something specific, and Captain Chen's extraction was the trigger event." General Santos stepped closer to the map. "Lisa Chen was supposed to be dead. Helicopter crash. Closed casket funeral. How is she alive and in hostile hands?" "Because her death was staged to provide her with deep cover for a classified counterintelligence operation," Sarah replied. "She was investigating financial irregularities in defense contractor payments, specifically, payments to shell companies controlled by foreign intelligence services." She traced a pattern on the map with her finger. "Ma'am, the same shell companies that have been providing civilian contractors to military installations across the eastern seaboard, including the background check company that verified my own credentials." The implications crashed down on everyone present like an avalanche. Morrison felt her knees weaken as she realized the scope of the security breach. "Jesus Christ," Morrison whispered. "How many installations are compromised?" Sarah pulled a small notebook from her custodial coveralls, not the random scribblings of a janitor, but precise intelligence assessments, written in military tactical shorthand. "Based on my observations and Captain Chen's research, potentially every major training facility from Fort Benning to Fort Bragg." General Santos studied the notebook with the intensity of someone reading her own death warrant. "Phoenix 7, What's their endgame? Why reveal themselves? Sarah's answer chilled everyone in the room. Because tonight, there's a major training exercise scheduled. Operation Thunderdrop. 300 paratroopers conducting night insertion training with full combat loads and live ammunition. She looked directly at Morris. Colonel, what would happen if those paratroopers received modified drop zone coordinates? If their targeting data was altered to strike specific locations instead of designated training areas? Morrison's face went white as the scenario played out in her mind. They could hit the Pentagon, Fort Belvoir, any high-value target within range of their insertion aircraft. Exactly, Sarah confirmed, and it would appear to be a tragic training accident caused by navigation errors and communication failure. The perfect false flag operation, with 300 airborne witnesses who genuinely believed they were conducting routine training. General Santos was already reaching for her secure communication device. We need to abort Thunderdrop immediately and lock down the entire base. Sarah shook her head grimly. Ma'am, I don't think we can abort anything. I think the operation is already in motion. As if summoned by Sarah's words, the base-wide public address system crackled to life with an announcement that sent ice through everyone's veins. Attention all personnel. This is Colonel Brooks, Base Operations. Due to security concerns, Fort Bragg is now under lockdown protocol. All training exercises will proceed as scheduled. No personnel are authorized to leave the base until further notice. General Santos's face hardened as she realized the trap that was closing around them. Colonel Brooks isn't supposed to be on base today. She's at a conference in Washington. Sarah was already moving toward the office's weapon locker, her elderly facade completely abandoned. General, whoever's using Brooks's authority codes has just locked down 300 paratroopers with full combat loads and isolated them from outside communication. Morrison grabbed her radio trying to contact her command staff but was greeted only by static. All tactical frequencies are being jammed. We're cut off. Through the office windows they could see soldiers moving with purpose across the base, following orders they believed were legitimate. But Sarah's trained eye caught details that revealed the true scope of the operation. Ma'am, observe the movement patterns, Sarah said, pointing toward a squad of paratroopers heading toward the ammunition depot. Those aren't standard Thunderdrop formations. They're establishing security perimeters around critical infrastructure. General Santos followed Sarah's gaze and felt her blood chill. The soldiers weren't preparing for a training exercise. They were unknowingly participating in the seizure of their own base. How many hostiles are we dealing with? Santos. Sarah pulled out a different notebook, this one containing detailed personnel observations from her months of surveillance. Minimum 15 confirmed infiltrators in key positions, likely more in supporting role. They've placed operatives in communications, logistics, security and training command. She opened to a specific page showing organizational charts with faces and names marked in red ink. General, they didn't just infiltrate Fort Bragg. They've been grooming this operation for years, placing assets in positions where they could influence training schedules, ammunition allocations, and communication protocols. Morrison looked at the charts with growing horror. Some of these people I've worked with for years. How is this possible? Long-term recruitment and placement, Sarah replied grimly. Classic foreign intelligence methodology. Identify ideologically vulnerable personnel, provide financial incentives, gradually increase their involvement until they're too compromised to back out. General Santos was studying the tactical situation with the rapid analysis of someone who had commanded operations in hostile territory. Phoenix 7. What's our force strength? Sarah's answer was brutally honest. Ma'am, at this moment we have 3 confirmed loyal personnel against approximately 300 paratroopers who believe they're following legitimate orders, supported by at least 15 hostile operatives in command position. The sound of vehicles approaching the building made everyone freeze. Through the windows they could see a squad of paratroopers in full combat gear surrounding the administrative building. Attention personnel in the building, came a voice through a bullhorn. By order of base command you are to exit the building immediately for security screening. You have 60 seconds to comply. Sarah looked at General Santos with grim determination. Ma'am, I think our 60 seconds just started. Sarah moved with startling speed for someone who had been shuffling around with a mop minutes earlier. General, this building has 4 exits. They've covered the main entrance and likely the emergency exits, but there's a maintenance tunnel that connects to the old bunker system. She was already pulling weapons from the office's emergency locker, not the standard Army M4s, but older, more specialized equipment that had been stored for contingency operations. These M21 sniper rifles were supposedly decommissioned, Sarah said, checking the action on a weapon that looked like it had seen extensive use. but I've been maintaining them. Just in case. General Santos grabbed an M4 and spare magazines, her movements showing the automatic competence of someone who had done this countless times before. Colonel Morrison, can you access the base's emergency alert system from here? Morrison, still reeling from the revelation that her base had been compromised for years, struggled to focus. There's an emergency panel in the back office. Why? Because we need a distraction, Sarah answered, already moving toward the panel, and we need to create enough chaos to mask our movement to the operations center. Within seconds, Sarah had triggered the fire suppression system throughout the entire complex. Alarms began blaring, and emergency lighting bathed everything in pulsing red strobe. 30 seconds, came the voice through the bullhorn, now competing with a cacophony of fire alarms. Sarah opened a floor panel that revealed a narrow tunnel leading into darkness. This connects to the bunker system under the operations center. From there, we can access the secure transmission equipment and abort Thunderdrop. What's the mission? General Santos asked as they prepared to descend into the tunnel. Sarah's answer was delivered with the cold precision of someone who had operated in situations where failure meant global consequences. Stop Operation Thunderdrop, rescue Captain Chen, and prevent the assassination of approximately half the Pentagon's senior leadership who will be attending the demonstration. They dropped into the tunnel just as the paratroopers breached the building above them. The sound of boots and shouted commands echoed through the ventilation systems as they crawled through darkness toward an uncertain objective. In the narrow confines of the tunnel, General Santos found herself following a woman she had known only by reputation and code name, wondering how someone who had been declared dead by her own agency had ended up as their only hope of preventing a disaster of unimaginable proportion. Phoenix 7, Santos whispered as they navigated the underground maze. How long have you been planning for this scenario? Sarah's reply came through the darkness with matter-of-fact certainty. Ma'am, I've been planning for this scenario since the day they told me Captain Chen was dead and I knew they were lying. Behind them the sound of pursuit was growing louder. The hostiles had discovered the tunnel entrance and were following them into the underground labyrinth that Sarah knew better than anyone alive. The real operation was just beginning. The bunker system beneath Fort Bragg was a relic of Cold War paranoia, but Sarah navigated its corridors with the confidence of someone who had spent months mapping every passage. They emerged in the basement of the operations center, where the real scope of the hostile operation became clear. Jesus Christ, Morrison whispered, staring at banks of sophisticated electronic equipment that definitely wasn't standard Army issue. How long has this been here? Sarah was already examining the equipment with professional expertise. Based on the installation methodology, at least 3 years. This isn't a temporary operation, General. This is a permanent intelligence collection and command facility. General Santos studied the screens showing surveillance feeds from throughout the base. They've been watching every training exercise, every classified briefing, every personnel movement. But Sarah's attention was focused on a specific monitor showing a feed from what appeared to be a detention facility. On the screen, Captain Chen sat in a stark white room, apparently unharmed, but clearly under duress. She's being held in Building 47, Sarah said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. Former classified research facility, now supposedly used for equipment storage. It's a trap, Morrison said. They're using her as bait to draw you out. Sarah was already checking her weapon and preparing to move. Colonel, everything about this operation has been a trap. The question is whether we're walking into their trap, or they're walking into mine. She pointed to the surveillance monitors showing paratroopers moving throughout the base in formation. Ma'am, observe the ammunition loads and weapons configurations. These aren't training loadouts, they're preparing for actual combat operations. General Santos's expression hardened as she realized the implications. They're not just planning to use our paratroopers as unwitting participants in a false flag, they're planning to use them as an actual assault force. Sarah pulled up building schematics on one of the hijacked computer terminals. General, Building 47 has underground connections to the old ammunition storage bunkers. If they've been stockpiling additional equipment and weapons, they could arm a force large enough to take Washington. Morrison finished, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah was studying the building schematics with the intensity of someone planning a one-woman assault on a hardened position. Ma'am, I need 20 minutes to reach Building 47 and extract Captain Chen. Can you hold this position and prevent them from activating the Thunderdrop modification? General Santos looked at the banks of hostile equipment, knowing that dismantling it would require expertise they didn't possess and time they didn't have. Phoenix 7, those aren't great odds. Sarah's response came with the grim humor of someone who had survived impossible situations before. General, if I wanted good odds I would have stayed retired. She was already moving toward the exit, her transformation from elderly custodian to operational legend now complete. "Ma'am, if I don't make contact within 30 minutes, assume I'm compromised and initiate emergency protocols with higher command." The rescue mission that would determine the fate of the operation was about to begin. Sarah moved through Fort Bragg's maze of buildings like a ghost returning to haunt familiar territory. Years of custodial work had given her intimate knowledge of every service tunnel, utility corridor, and forgotten passage in the complex. Building 47 loomed before her in the morning light, its innocuous exterior hiding whatever horrors waited inside. But Sarah had faced worse odds in places where failure meant more than personal death. It meant the death of missions that protected people who would never know her name. The building's security was sophisticated but predictable. Sarah bypassed electronic locks with tools she had hidden throughout the base during her months of preparation, moving through corridors that led inexorably toward the detention area. When she found Captain Chen, she was exactly where the surveillance cameras had shown her, sitting calmly in a white room that looked more like a medical facility than a prison cell. But Sarah's trained eye caught the details that revealed the true nature of her captivity. "The man behind the mirror isn't going to let you just walk out," Chen said quietly as Sarah picked the lock on her cell door. "He's been waiting for you." Sarah paused, recognizing the controlled tone her former student used when she was conveying critical intelligence under observation. "How long have you been feeding them information?" 18 months, Chen replied, moving to stand beside her. "Same as you. They recruited me to investigate the same operation you've been tracking. The difference is, they convinced me you were dead." The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Both mentor and student had been working the same case from different angles, each believing the other was dead, each being manipulated by handlers who understood exactly how to exploit their relationship. "Lisa, we need to move. The Thunder Drop operation is scheduled to begin in less than 2 hours." But as they moved toward the exit, the lights in the corridor suddenly blazed to full intensity and a voice echoed from hidden speakers throughout the building. "Phoenix 7, you've been more resourceful than we anticipated, but this is where your operation ends." Sarah recognized the voice immediately. Colonel Brooks, who was supposed to be at a conference in Washington but was clearly the operational commander of the hostile force. "We have 300 paratroopers under our command, sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities, and complete control of this base's communications and logistics," Brooks continued. "What exactly do you think you can accomplish?" Sarah looked at Chen, seeing in her eyes the same determination that had driven her through decades of impossible missions. "Colonel Brooks, you made one critical error in your operational planning." "Really? And what was that?" Sarah's reply carried the cold certainty of someone who had never failed a mission when the stakes truly mattered. "You assumed I was working alone." The sound of helicopters approaching from multiple directions began to echo across the base, growing louder by the second. The cavalry arrived, not as a single force, but as a coordinated strike by every special operations unit on the eastern seaboard. Sarah's 18-month surveillance operation had been far more than a solo mission. It had been the advance reconnaissance for a counterintelligence operation of unprecedented scope. As Sarah and Chen emerged from Building 47, the sky above Fort Bragg filled with aircraft that represented the full spectrum of American special operations capability. Delta Force, Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and units whose names were classified above most generals' clearance levels descended on the base with surgical precision. "Phoenix 7, this is Overwatch," came a voice through Sarah's concealed radio earpiece. "Base is secure. All hostile assets are in custody. Thunder Drop has been permanently canceled." The 300 paratroopers who had unknowingly been preparing to participate in a false flag operation found themselves surrounded by operators who looked like they had stepped out of a classified fever dream. The transition from routine training day to the largest counterintelligence operation in modern history happened so quickly that most of the legitimate personnel never fully understood what they had narrowly avoided. Colonel Brooks and her network of infiltrators were taken into custody with an efficiency that spoke to months of preparation. Their sophisticated equipment was seized, their communications were intercepted, and their operational plans were dissected by analysts who specialized in preventing exactly this type of scenario. 3 days later, Sarah found herself in a secure briefing room at the Pentagon facing a panel of officials whose combined security clearances could have accessed every classified program in the government. "Phoenix 7, said the general leading the panel. "Your unauthorized operation at Fort Bragg prevented what our analysts assess would have been the most successful false flag attack in modern history." Sarah sat quietly, once again appearing to be nothing more than an elderly woman in civilian clothes, but everyone in the room understood that appearances were the most dangerous deception of all. "Ma'am, Captain Chen and I were investigating the same network from different angles. The operation succeeded because we were finally able to coordinate our intelligence and leverage my established cover. Chen, sitting beside her, had been officially declared alive and reinstated to her position with military intelligence. Her fake death had provided the deep cover necessary to penetrate the hostile network, but the psychological cost of letting her mentor believe she was gone had been almost unbearable. The question now, the general continued, is what happens next. Your cover at Fort Bragg is obviously blown, but your expertise— Sarah raised a hand to interrupt, a gesture that would have been insubordinate from anyone else but carried absolute authority coming from her. Sir, I'm too old for active operation, but training the next generation of operators, that's something I could do, officially this time. 6 months later, recruits at Fort Bragg began learning from an instructor whose methods seemed impossibly advanced, whose knowledge appeared unlimited, and whose identity remained classified at levels they would never understand. They called her Sergeant Major Mitchell, and they had no idea they were learning from a legend.